Well, my business evolved from a hobby, and it was something that initially, obviously, I didn't take it seriously. I was just creating cakes for family events. And a lot of people would just be blown away, and they would say, "Which bakery did you get this from?" And, at that time, I was at home with my son. I had taken time off. I used to work at Morgan Stanley. And I always knew I wanted to start my own business, so I was exploring various businesses, and I said, in the back of my mind, I always thought about this. And I took the time, finally, researched it and decided to launch it. What I noticed in the market is there were tons of bakeries, obviously, but nobody really created cakes with a South Asian or an Indian touch. And I always had all these ideas for cakes, or what I wanted to see on cakes when I would go to weddings. And everything would be South Asian, everything would have an Indian touch. And then you would see the cake and it would just be bland, or it would have an American design. And I would say, this is kind of odd. Why is everything so elaborate? Everything's so, over the top Indian. And then, the cake doesn't really go with everything. And so I said, I think there's a niche, there's a market for this. Nobody's doing it. And so that's really how I brought about my company. The other side of it is I'm a strict vegetarian. I don't eat eggs. So in the marketplace, there was also, there was one bakery that does do that, and they still do. But they would do very basic sheet cakes, nothing fancy. And so I saw that there are two different things that I could cater to. And so I launched my company. And so, while I do create cakes for all types of people, I would say predominantly what sets us apart is the ability to create cakes with an Indian touch. And so that's pretty much what I do.
And shoes.
And shoes.
Adam,
Well, I'm honored that you guys think I have a brand, because I don't. It completely came off as...
You are your brand.
Yeah, you live your brand.
Yeah, it's been a sort of a weird professional map. I started off as a software engineer, kind of a boring profession if you're someone who's very creative and wants to do something a bit more inspirational that's readily visible. So I took to Twitter because I felt Facebook wasn't really the most inspiring platform for me to have conversations with people professionally. And LinkedIn at the time really was, if you can imagine, even more drier than it is today. So I took to Twitter, and I convinced a couple of politicians in DC to let me tweet for them.
Wait, but you can't just skip over that.
I can't talk about who these are.
Yeah. No, how did you go about, considering that you were going from no background to tweeting, how did you go right to the...
Because I had a couple hundred followers, and they had 2 or 3, and this was back in 2009. Minor politicians, minor celebrities. So I let them convince me to ghostwrite tweets for them, and they got some success through that. So I kind of parlayed that into getting more clients, so to speak. Before I knew it, this had become some sort of a hobby that was consuming so much time that I decided to shut that side down and kind of focus on my own brand building via Twitter. And the one thing I realized after studying a lot of the greats out there on Twitter was you have to be positive. There's so much negativity nowadays that it's so easy to criticize companies or brands and other people that what really resonated was a positive message. So for me, that was a key takeaway, and I kind of made that my goal to try and inject a little bit of positivity into my tweets.
Sure.
One last point that was really anti-Twitter when I first started out. So for me, this was a kind of a revelation of how powerful this platform could be if you really applied your skills to it.
I think, what I'm hearing as a general theme is that there is this value in being authentic in whatever, marketing efforts you're carrying out, whether it's BB Magazine, developing a very specific set of vocabulary, or, enjoy your ability to tell your story and weave that into what you do Farrell, you know, your ability to balance the South Asian and the American in a much more natural way, I guess, and Adam, your ability to be positive over social media. So, I mean, how, for each of you, like, how does that authenticity kind of play into your marketing efforts? I'd love to hear a little more about that.
So what we do is, obviously we have BB Magazine, but we also have BBPR, where we represent companies like the Kati Roll Company, for the small restaurant.
The small little.
Yeah. But so one of the things, which by the way, I love Twitter. I literally love Twitter. You have to be authentic, and by that it really means is you have to know what your brand is, you have to define your brand, and then you have to really explore that brand across different platforms, and I'll keep it to social media for right now. And when you're talking, you know, you have to take the good, obviously, mostly the good. There's some bad, you know, and there's the ugly too, which is a real part of life. So you have to be looking for that and know ways to address that when it comes to your social media. So one of the things that I love about Twitter is that, you know, yeah, it's like, you know, what is it, 100 and something, 37 characters?
140.
140. And so it's not just that, oh, you're sending out this message, whatever, but people are connecting to you, and they're writing back, and they're, you know, putting in your hashtag and saying, which is, by the way, BB Magazine, if anybody is on your thing. But you're, you know, so you're having a short conversation, which is great. But then also, the best thing about it is the hashtags. So you can see what's trending, and you can, you know, organize yourself with those things. Like you can say, oh, you know, BB Magazine, and then you can see what people are saying about you. And then the other thing is you can search. So you don't even have to know anybody's Twitter handle. You can search for, you know, say we, and you'll see what kind of conversations are. And that's really, really important when you're reaching out to your customers, because they might not know your Twitter handle. They might not mention you, but if they mention something, you know, that you're talking about, whether it's, you know, one of the clients that we're putting out there, or it's for the magazine, I can see what people are doing, and then I can reach out to new customers. So say, you know, Anu wrote something, oh, I'm looking for an Indian, you know, lehenga. And then, like, I didn't know that, but I checked up Indian lehenga, and now I can say, hey, BB Magazine has this particular stuff, would you like to see it? So it's that way that you can really talk to people in a sort of, you know, it's not like super hardcore engagement, but it's enough to know that you care. And with so much information out there, I think that's really important, that, you know, your brand is speaking to not just the customers you have, but also your future customers. And then also you can take that and put that into Facebook as well, where you're looking at, you know, I can now put out with Instagram and Pinterest and all that good stuff, and you can put out pictures, you can put out information, reports, everything. I mean, it's such a great way to connect with an audience that's bigger than your own, and do it in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I mean, I think somebody touched on this in the previous panel, but, you know, it does sound cliche, but the world really, I mean, it really does feel like it's our oyster with Twitter. The amount of people that we're now, you know, able to connect with. I mean, if you don't mind me sharing, I know Rima and Adam, they connected through Twitter, and it was thanks to a direct message that Rima sent Adam that he's here participating in this conference today, so you never know. But Joya, I'd love to talk a little bit more about the authenticity angle and how you weave that in.
Okay, so, you know, being a reporter, I've got people pitching me every day asking to be put on New York One or put on any of the other channels that I've ever, that I appear on. And that's fine, but when you are in a world now where you've got WordPress, you've got video blogging, you can create your own YouTube channel. You don't need a bunch of white guys sitting in a boardroom deciding whether or not you actually get to have a voice anymore. And because of that fact, one of the things that I always say to the women, because I have a lot of small business entrepreneurs who are in jewelry, who are in scarves, who are doing a lot of things, and they want to know how they can expand their social media brand. Let me tell you something, you got to tell your story. Don't just put up a pink dress and be like, hey, look at this great pink dress that I have on sale today. Tell me about the fabric. Tell me about why it is one shoulder. Tell me why you chose pink. You know, tell me a story that's going to set you aside from anybody else who is doing a damn pink dress today. Do you know what I mean? And I think
And
that's,
selfies don't count.
yes.
Let's stop selfies.
And I just think that, yeah. I just think that you have so many tools at your disposal now with which you can build your brand and talk about why you are unique. And telling your story is the most unique thing you are ever gonna bring to the table and sets you aside from everybody else. And I can't preach that enough.
Thank you. Carl, what about you? It doesn't necessarily, I guess, have to be social media, but just in terms of inserting something authentic into your marketing efforts.
Well, no, I agree absolutely
Yeah.
with Joya, and I do this all the time. I post pictures. I'm more of a Facebook person. I'm now getting into Twitter, and I agree with Aisha. It's something I've actually neglected, Twitter, and because I didn't really understand it. I'm not the best technology person, but she's absolutely right. Twitter exposes you to a larger universe other than just your Facebook friends. And, people can search you and find you. And I recently joined Instagram, and I actually got some business off of Instagram, because Instagram has the same type of, if you hashtag something, people can look you up and find you. And, it was good for me. And, I've actually been predominantly on Facebook, and Facebook has been great. One thing I have to say about Facebook is, for me personally, I found that my personal page actually gave me a lot more business than my company page. And I think, this is a common misconception that a lot of people have. They think their company page is the only place where they should promote their business. I beg to differ, and maybe some people will get annoyed that I'm promoting my business. Well, if you don't like it, you can always unfriend me. That's how I think of it. If you find it annoying, just unfriend me. I won't miss you. But do it tastefully. You don't want to do it all the time. You don't want to put up 12 postings a day about your business. But 1 or 2 a week, which is what I do, I think is fine. I don't think it's intrusive. And if somebody really has a problem with it, they can always leave. But I have found that it was great. People who don't know me, just like in Twitter, come to know about me, because when my friends like a posting or comment on a picture, all of their friends can see it. And so it builds your brand, it builds your exposure, it's a wonderful thing. So you should definitely use it. But getting back to what Joya was saying about, don't just put up a red skirt and say, here's a red skirt. I do the same thing when I post my cake pictures. I try to tell a story. I don't just say, here's a cake that we did for so-and-so. Like yesterday, I posted about Madhur Jaffrey. She recently contacted me. I sponsored dessert for Children's Hope luncheon recently, and she loved the favors that we did. So she called me the next day and asked me if we could do it for a dinner party. Now, I could have easily posted, Madhur Jaffrey ordered this, and that would have been bland and boring. So, I tried to make it a little appealing, and I tried to tell the whole story behind it. And people get engaged. You have to engage your clients, your friends, whoever it is. Make it interesting. Don't just put up something dry. That's it.
I have a point to add to
Yes.
that. I do a lot of talks now on branding, and a lot of people wonder why be on Google+. Let me tell you why you should be on Google+, because Google loves itself. So if you have an event coming up or you're doing something entrepreneurial and you put it up on Google+, guess what? I go and search you now. I go and search you, Piali. Google is going to populate that first page with stuff that you posted first. So if someone's Googling you or me, you want to make sure that first page is populated with as much positive stuff, to Adam's point, that talks about you and your business. And that is why you should be on Google+. It's also more tech savvy and more intellectual crowd that's on Google+ versus Facebook.
Yeah, I think that's especially, I guess, appealing to somebody who's just getting started, who doesn't have the resource, hire a social media expert. It sounds like Google makes that process a lot more.
Because Google loves itself, so
Right.
your stuff's going to come up higher because you published it on there.
Oh, that's very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, as a startup founder or business owner, you are also the chief brand holder. So it's very important to understand the responsibility you have to define a core set of values for your brand, what you stand for, and also what you stand against. And I think that's tricky for many to pull off in a positive way again, because we get so passionate about things we're against that we tend to come off as not being really agreeable or likable. So especially if you're looking to raise funding from VCs, remember that you have to project positivity, and because there's a lot not that's being read in what you're saying based on your tweets or your Facebook posts, and it really does impact whether or not you're going to be successful with the VC. Not always the case. It's good to have strong opinions, but it's also good to be thoughtful about and authentic, but thoughtful about how you're projecting your values, because ultimately you have to think like an Apple or a Chanel, and if that's where you're headed with your brand. But the other aspect of it is it's so easy to throw something out there. We're seeing a lot of these examples of people just drinking and tweeting, or getting called out for racist or homophobic or xenophobic comments. And unlike driving violations, Twitter violations stays to work, by the way. So it's you have to think, come up with a list of criteria, and this is what I do. If my tweet doesn't meet these 4 or 5 filters, I'm not going to tweet it, especially if I'm having tequila. So I think it's really important to understand what your flaws are when you're communicating on social media, and correct it very quickly before it gets out of control. It sounds simple, but it's so important to keep that in mind.
Can I expand on that? Yeah, one of the things also is, between you and me, this is going to be fun. One of the things also is there's a lot of you people who are starting companies or have companies, but there's also people who are just, people who are on Facebook and whatever. You always, just like Adam is saying, you have to, when you put something out on the internet, it is there forever. So think about that. So if you just broke up with someone and now you're going to do a whole thing of like, oh, life sucks. People are going to know, and your brand is going to be affected, whether that's your company or your personal self. Don't put out things like he's saying until you're really paying attention, and that includes, tagging yourself in drunk, we all have them, but why do we need to put them out there? You don't. You want to be known not just today, but 5 years, 10 years down the line as a professional in the field that you're in, and that means maintaining that in your personal life as well as in your professional. If you want to share those pictures, call your friends over and say, hey, look, but don't do it online. I know, I've had stuff, when we first all got on there, I was like, ooh, this is fun, let's put this. And then I started realizing, oh my God, 5 years later, they're still there. Let's get rid of those, But then Google picks it up and it starts showing. So just be careful.
I mean, to bring it to something a little more concrete, I guess, expanding on Adam's point about having every sort of tweet or update check a certain type of box, I guess, when you're posting things to further your brand, what are you aware of, and what, are you cognizant of the fact that, okay, if I'm tweeting, it needs to check these 3 boxes, whether it's, being a useful piece of information, being, promoting your brand, I'm sure you have better examples, but I'd love to hear a little bit about that. Adam, you want to start?
Yeah, I can. So at its core, it's about really marrying business tact with your own lifestyle. And you do have to get your personal, authentic perspective out there. And that's something you learn over time. It's not something that you just kind of fall into unless you're some sort of communications savant. The reality is many of us learn from our mistakes, and that's the key. I think people are very forgiving, but they also want you to see bounce back pretty quickly from your mistakes, and come back with something relevant and helpful. That's the reason people follow you. Don't just share news articles because people can get that anywhere, but put your own spin on it. Figure out what it is that you think is unique about a piece of content you're sharing. It could be a news article, but highlight something that isn't just a headline. Pull out a stat, maybe. Figure out who your audience is and how you're trying to appeal to them, and what makes your tweet, for example, different from all the others out there. So that's a good thing. Just go through, the Twitter feed and see, how you can stand out. Because I'm seeing a lot of people just take the simple approach of just kind of copying and pasting a tweet from somewhere else. That doesn't make you stand out. So, figure out what it is that you bring that is a little different. And that habit is so important, especially on Twitter, because you get 140 characters. but it's also brevity of the highest regard. It helps you write better emails. I respond faster to direct messages now or emails, because when I see an email that's half a page long, I'm not gonna have time to read it. But a direct message, very clear to the point, like Rima emailed or DM'd me the other day, hey, I need you to email, can you speak at a conference? Boom, done, right? So I think that's very important skill to master, to communicate great ideas very succinctly.
Do you have anything to add? Do you have certain things that a Facebook update or a tweet needs to accomplish when you put it out there?
What do you mean?
Whether it's sharing a piece of news or, putting something out there that's an extension of your brand.
Your criteria
Yeah.
for writing a post and having a post.
Well, I try to keep it interesting. I think that's the first criteria. Classy, tasteful. Sometimes I make it a little sexy. When I say sexy, I mean, not in a very classy way. Because people don't have time. You have to engage them, and you have to engage them within seconds, or they're going to go on to the next post. So make sure whatever is the essence of your post, you get to it, and you get to it fast, and make it interesting. So I guess, and be yourself, don't be somebody you are not, and in my case, I try to, although I have a personal page, I try not to post about my personal life. I keep it mostly work-related. I do add in a few interesting things personally here and there, but, I mean, I have children, I have a family life, but I'm not on Facebook for that. I have plenty of friends. I don't need to go on Facebook for that. I'm there to promote my business. People, when they think of me, they think of cake. And so,
It's a nice
that's
way to
exactly
be.
what I want them to think of. I don't want them
Right.
to think of my kids. I love my kids, but I don't want everybody to think of my kids. They're mine. So I don't post about the picnic we go to or their basketball game or whatever. Once in a while I will, but predominantly I keep it work related because there's a very clear message. You have to know your message. You absolutely have to know. You have to be very clear and be very short and brief.
I think, as somebody who does follow you on social media, it's almost impossible not to think of you. And, for all I know, your middle name is the cake designer.
I am a huge fan of visuals. I rarely ever put up a post that does not have a compelling picture that goes along with it. And I think that's because people are just naturally drawn to beautiful visuals, and then they'll probably maybe read the accompanying text. So that's the first thing that's one of my biggest criteria. And the second thing I would say is that the same thing that you're posting on Pinterest is not the same thing you want to be posting on LinkedIn versus Facebook versus all the other platforms that you're on. You really need to work to tailor what you're going to post on each of those different platforms. Where you're like, oh my God, I can't do all this in one day. Guess what? There are tools out there that allow you to manage all of the platforms that you're on. You can be on Hootsuite, you can be on buffer.com, and that way you can schedule, even for the whole week, for the whole month if you want, all of the tweets and all of the messaging that you want to send out. You can actually sit down and schedule it all in one go and then be done with it. I think people probably think I'm on my computer all day long, but I'm not. Everything is scheduled into Hootsuite and going out at scheduled times. And I think it also behooves you to know the times a day that the mass amount of eyeballs are actually looking. If you read any white papers about Facebook, the peak times that people are posting, because they know they're going to get the max amount of eyeballs, is before work and after work. 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., 11 a.m. when most people are probably seated at their desk, 7 o'clock and 11 o'clock at night when people are probably put their kids to bed and they finally have a little time to themselves.
What I've noticed on your sort of social media presence is that what you tend to do is, which I think is an extension of the Lady Drinks brand, is support up-and-coming entrepreneurs through your posts. Whether it's singling out or calling out designers, the visuals. So tell me a little bit about what the response to that has been.
So I'll tell you what, next Lady Drinks is June 5th, and I've got 2 women who have successfully raised funding through the city's program that are coming to speak. I had started out with my marketing with just the guy that was like part of the mayor's office that was going to come and speak, and nobody was liking anything. So I was like, all right, I have to change my marketing strategy now. So I got two women, one who's a yoga instructor and has her own business up in Harlem, and one woman who's another celebrity baker, Alia Baylor, who lives up in Harlem and also has raised funding through the city. Do you know the minute I put their pictures up and started saying that they're going to be speaking, everyone in their network started sharing because they are supporting their friend Alia Baylor or their friend Lara Land. So I see the purchase in not only talking about what it is that is my agenda, which of course is promoting my event, but also supporting the other women that are helping make my event so kick-ass.
I think that's really important too. What about your criteria?
For putting up posts?
Yeah.
So one of the main things that we like to do is we have, if you go to bbmagazine.com, we have our, I guess, lifestyle blog is what it would be. So we like to drive traffic through our social media to an article that was written, and literally, like, we'll put up the post, and then I'll come back in an hour and look at because we can see our statistics, we'll have like 1,000 views, within an hour, which is awesome. So what we try to do is when we put up our posts and everything, we try to make sure that it's talking about an article that might have come up or putting up some sort of point, basically some sort of news thing, and it drives traffic to our bbmagazine.com. The other thing that is important, I think, if people are wondering, should I be on Twitter? Should I be on Facebook? Should I be on Instagram? Should I be on Pinterest? Look at the demographics, like Instagram is primarily like the 20s, late teens, 20s. Pinterest is awesome for women. They're, I think they make over, 70,000 on the average, and they're like 30s and 40s. Facebook
80%
is...
of people on Pinterest are women, so.
Yeah, exactly. And then, Facebook is older, Twitter is younger. So think about, when you're thinking about your brand or what audience you're trying to reach or what you're trying to do with your social media, what language you're trying to say, think about, who is out there in general and who you're trying to tap into, and then you'll start seeing it. So if you are having, an event for 20-year-olds and you're on Facebook, you probably won't have as much success as if you put up some really fabulous filtered pictures on Instagram of what this event's going to be. So,
If one of you wouldn't mind volunteering, could you walk us through how you might take one idea and then tailor it to say Pinterest, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram?
I'm not sure if it's about one idea. I think it really is about the message that you're going with, like the client. Like, we deal with different clients.
Okay.
So we have one client that's, all we do with her is we put her on Pinterest over and over and over again because it works for her. She's in the wedding business, We have another client that all they want to do is talk on Twitter because, it works for them. So it's not necessarily, the idea can be the same across, but it really is what your overall message is and where you want to take that and who you want to reach. So you concentrate on that. You're so good with, Facebook and whatever, like whenever you have an event, pre and post,
I would argue too that if you, for a lot of the women that have a very visual product, if you're doing scarves or you're doing face products or you're doing, I want to see pictures of that, and I would put that on Pinterest. I would put that on Instagram because it's a visually driven medium versus a service. If you're tweeting for someone, what are you going to put up a picture of? Your tweet? No, you're going to, but I'm saying that if you're doing necklaces and jewelry, I want to see your jewelry. And oftentimes now, I have a lot of people who are pitching me to wear their things. Like, I'm wearing a Lady Drinks piece of jewelry today, but they may not have necessarily the most robust website for whatever reason. I actually go to their Pinterest page because I can see the whole collection on there, or I can see the whole collection on Instagram. And I think it really behooves you as someone who has a large collection and maybe doesn't have the funds to do a great website yet, to at least have your whole collection somewhere where I don't have to go through pictures of you with your family and all that stuff on Facebook to see your whole collection.
It also, I just saw her jump back in, I feel like I'm having a conversation in my living room.
Yeah.
So BB Magazine, we have our Facebook, obviously, we have a Twitter, obviously. We don't do Pinterest, and everybody keeps asking me why. It's weddings, you should do it. Because my thing is, I don't want to put my pictures on Pinterest, I want you to come to my website. So you have to think about what you are going to use and not use and make a really conscious decision about that.
You don't want Pinterest subbing in for...
Oh yeah, I don't want people to be like, oh yeah, that's BB. It's like, no, it's not.
But you know what? You can put a fair amount of text with a picture
Oh,
on
I know,
Pinterest,
but
and it can drive traffic back to your
Yeah,
website.
we specifically made a decision not to do that
Yeah.
because it wasn't, we do all our photography, which Andy is here. Where are you? Andy shot our cover, hi, oh, there you are. So since we do our own content, we don't want to steal somebody else's picture and promote that it's our own, and we'd rather bring them to our website. It drives sales for the magazine too, so.
Couple of quick points. I think social media in general, whether it's Pinterest or Snapchat, and by the way, the people who are on Snapchat today might be parents in 5 or 6 years, so keep that in mind before you disregard Snapchat. But, social media is a sort of a participation sport where you have to engage. Don't just be blasting things out there and expect people to sort of embrace that and follow you, because that's not going to happen. So jump in where appropriate in conversations and provide something meaningful in that exchange. Do it respectfully. Don't get into shouting matches. But the key thing is that it's also a marathon. It's not going to happen overnight. Success on social media is very, very hard. It's getting harder on Facebook because of various reasons. But that said, you find that when you make the mistakes is when you get the most followers. When you shoot your mouth up and you say something that you shouldn't have, the whole world's listening suddenly. So it's a cautionary tale, but it's also something that you should be learning from. And I find that the best ideas that ignite the conversations are the ones that are positive, that are unique, that are, you may not get the most number of followers or retweets, but people remember you for the positivity. So I think I keep coming back to that. That's the one lesson that has sustained at least, so far, knock on wood. But you never know. You could be one bad tweet away from losing it all. In fact, there's a case with this director from PayPal. I'm not sure if you've heard about the situation. And he went to Jazz Fest in New Orleans, got drunk, and started tweeting about his bosses, and they fired him. And then he went on this 5-day rant. And he can never take that back. Supposedly he's starting his own company now. And for those who want to follow him and learn from his lessons, his Twitter handle is Rakesh Lobster.
How many, I mean,
He got like 700 followers after his meltdown, but it's not the best way. I mean, you can buy followers, and that's the other thing. When you get exposed, you lose credibility instantly.
Yeah.
Because you can have hundreds of thousands of followers, but if they're not retweeting you, they're not favoriting, if they're not engaging with you, you get called out very, very quickly. That's a shame. I've seen people do that too.
yeah. Did you want to add?
So I was in a taxi going somewhere, I'm sure, and this nightly news piece kept coming up. This woman who was quilting, and she was teaching women how to quilt in a day, something that probably takes you, years to do. I don't know. She was quilting in a day, and I finally had to go home and see why was there a piece about women quilting on the nightly news in a primetime slot. Well, you know what? She had created herself a YouTube channel where she was doing tutorials on how to quilt in a day. She managed to get 20,000 followers. She now has 1 million followers, and Nightly News came looking for her because she had populated this massive YouTube channel with tutorials on how to quilt. And now she was speaking, where women were coming from all over the country to Hamilton, Minnesota, to get her tutorials in person, because she was like a rock star on how to quilt.
So this was like full-fledged quilt in a day.
Quilting in a day. Do you and I
Like
care about
a week
quilting? No,
equivalent
but you
of
know what?
quilt.
She is on Nightly News at a primetime slot now because reporters are out there looking for stories, and they saw the amount of followers, to Adam's point, that she had. And they were like, clearly we can't ignore this person. I see time and time again reporters that are now being cast for Fox and other places because they had their own YouTube channel where they just positioned themselves as an expert on a particular subject and just started talking. Positively, obviously, but I think the model by which people are now cast for things has changed drastically. People are looking for you. So the best thing you can do is populate your Google page, going back to my earlier point, with as much positivity as you can, with as much material as you can about what your brand is. In this case, quilting.
I think, from a little bit of research I've done, I've noticed that there's this emphasis on the importance of listening on social media. Listening is just as important as actually tweeting or updating or, you know, getting your message out there. So how have each of you sort of taken feedback maybe you've gotten from your branding efforts in the digital world and, you know, kind of modified or changed what you've done as a result?
So we had one of our clients years ago had a customer reach out to them, and I'm going to leave out the details because, you know, obviously my clients. But anyways, a customer put on her Facebook that she had an issue, and we caught it, and you know, and it was a pretty big issue. But she didn't tell us; she just put it on. Now all her friends are reading this. So what we did is we reached out to her. We had to pay $1 to, you know, be a friend with her on Facebook because they don't allow if you have no connections, they don't allow it. We paid the $1, we emailed her, we had the owner of the company go and meet with her in person because it was a very big issue, to go and do this. And what did she do in response is she wrote back, oh, they took care of me. So we listened, we found and we listened, and she gave us free press out of it by saying they took care of me. So now all her friends know, and other people know now. She'll hopefully will go around and tell that story that, oh, this particular brand or this company does this, so they're good. You know, you can't buy that, and you have to like listen. If you don't know what your customers are saying, or your clients are saying, or your audience is saying, if you're not listening, you can't respond. So it's, you know, like what Adam was saying is be, you know, thoughtful and think about what's the conversation back and forth. Don't just keep shouting.
I'm going to actually bring up a different point. Facebook changed its algorithms in December of 2013. So you'll notice that there's been a huge drop-off in how many people are seeing your posts. Maybe you're aware of it, maybe you're not, but if you have Facebook Insights, you can see that. And so why did they do that? They want you to pay for ads. And you don't have to have some massive ad budget, but spend $5, spend $1 each day. But if you want to ensure that you want to get people to see your stuff on Facebook, you now got to pay to play. And that is an important piece of advice for anybody who's advertising on Facebook and needs to make sure the maximum amount of eyeballs are on it. So, I mean, that's an instance of keeping your finger on the pulse of marketing and listening and watching, I think, you know, to see what's happening with your own brand, if that's the primary medium that you're using with which to promote your company.
I'm not so sure. I guess I'll go off on a tangent or add to what Joy just said. On my company page, somebody that I know had a lot of followers, so she gave me a little tip on how to add more followers on Facebook. So on my company page, I did exactly what she said. My number of followers went from 1,000 to 15,000 in 12 months. But you know what, it was useless. And I'm sure a lot of you have read about it in the last few months. These people, they're camps, or I forget what the term is, but
Farms.
farms or whatever. They're paid to click on pages to like them. And
That's true,
they're
by the way,
not-
like Michael Kors, the vast number of the clicks come from Indonesia of all places. Something
Yeah.
very shady about
it's
that.
useless. It's so useless because these people are never, ever going to be your client. So that's why I was saying that the personal page, I thought, was more effective, at least for me. Because people don't just need to see a product. They need to identify with you. They need to like you. They need to trust you. They need to be able to relate to you. And you can't really do that on your company page. Like what I post on my personal page, I don't post on my company page. Not everything. Like, you know, if I go to a high-end event, even if I'm not sponsoring, or even if I didn't cater the dessert, I post about it on my personal page. I can never do that on my company page. But people get a sense, you know, or you go on vacation or whatever, people get a sense of who you are. And that's how you're going to stand out from your competitors. If you're a jewelry person, whatever it is, there are trillion jewelry people, there are trillion, you know, in your case, you're a consultant. You know, how do you set yourself apart? You need to develop a personality. And the only way you can do that is by doing that on your, I feel, the personal page.
Yeah, I think, you know, generating impact is, really means staying true to your creative intent while being relatable. And that's tough. It's something you learn over time. But it's also about embracing the conversation without demystifying the brand. So it's this fine line depending on what kind of brand you're trying to create. By the way, easy to build a product, very hard to build a brand. So I hope you all got that from this so far. But especially on social media, because you're really putting yourself out there. It's not packaged PR or well thought out campaigns that took months to craft. This is real time stuff that's happening that can impact your brand any second. Which is why some of the bigger brands like Apple kind of shy away from social media. Chanel shies away from it as well. But that's not a very sustainable way to build a brand anymore. So figure out how to get better at it. Real-time marketing is where it's at. But it's also like, a little bit like solving an algebra equation, right? It's like what you do to one side, you do to the other. So don't just keep talking about yourself. Just figure out, how you can help others. Like, if you're retweeting others or you're elevating some others who you think need more attention. I have a very liberal follow back policy, so I follow people with very low follower accounts, and I favorite very actively. I think I've got like 70,000 some favorites because I'm constantly favoriting tweets to let people know that you're not just speaking to a vacuum. I think that's important, especially on Facebook. I'm sure you've posted something and you've wondered why it wasn't getting any likes or shares or comments. It's because of the algorithm. And the same thing with Twitter. It's very easy to get lost in the Twitter hose. So if you find something that's interesting, don't be hesitant about using that favorite button to throw them a favorite because they might return the favorite.
I think on that note, we're gonna open it up to questions. All right, is that Meg? And by the way, apologies for my voice. I don't usually sound like this. It's thanks to spring allergies.
Midwest.
I'm Hina Tabla on all social
Yes.
media. Thank you guys for such practical and useful advice, and Arti for asking such pointed questions to get those answers out of you. I think it's really easy to think, like, social media is so important, and I work with Valium School of Indian Music, so we do South Asian performing arts, and we have this whole strategy with blogging and with social media content, and it can easily take over your life if you want it to, and take away from the rest of the work that you do, the products or services. So I wanted to know from you guys, how do you kind of set limits for how much time you spend on social media? Is it through measuring conversions? Or like, how do you set those guidelines for yourselves to not allow social media to overwhelm everything that you do or your time? Or maybe the advice that you give your clients, Adam.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Sure. So the key would be to establish a sort of a daily framework for discipline. It's a framework for action, basically. You're disciplining how much time you're spending on social media, what you expect to get out of it on a daily basis. Don't let it turn into an addiction, because that's so easy to let happen. It happens to the best of us.
How do you know when you kind of crossed over into addiction territory?
I think it's really,
When your only friends are virtual.
well, the key would be to put in place a self-imposed schedule, right? Make it an hour, make it 2 hours, and commit yourself to following that. It's just like following a diet, or, but I think it's really, it really is important to do that. At first, you have to, you're in this, if you're starting out, it's a learning phase where you're really looking at all signals and figuring out which is working and which isn't. Don't be afraid to experiment, following again those clear guidelines of what to say and what not to say. But yeah, I think an hour or two a day is plenty of time, especially if you're learning in the process. Because again, this is building your brand. It's going to take time. You can hire a PR agency that really works well. If you can find a great intern to do it, but again, I think you need to own, come back to my point about if you are the founder of a company, if you are a business owner, you're also the chief brand holder. So it starts with you. You have to put in the time. You have to come up with the guidelines, solicit inputs from others, but ultimately, you know what the brand is, you know what that stands for, and so, you are in the best position to decide what that self-discipline means. Sorry, did that answer the question, or?
I'm going to reiterate a point I made earlier. There are tools now where you can sit down and schedule your entire postings for a month if you wanted to. And I think why am I telling you that again? Because you can actually think about the storyline. We keep coming back to this idea of story. You can build the trajectory of your story by sitting down once and scheduling the posts that are going to lead up to, let's say, your next dance performance. So the two tools, again, are Hootsuite and Buffer.com. And the thing I like about Buffer is if you're going to, as Adam was saying earlier, if you're going to find articles to share, you can actually schedule articles inside of Buffer to send out to your demographic as well. So I think there are tools that you can use that are at your disposal so that you can make sure social media does not take over your whole life. And you can have every single modality that you're on figured into Hootsuite, so you don't have to go post individually to LinkedIn and Google+, and then Twitter, and then Pinterest. You know what I mean? Like it allows you to do that from one dashboard.
Also, like again, with Hootsuite, they give you analytics across the board.
Yeah.
So what I would do is probably once a month, like sit down and look at your analytics of what you've done in like the past month. So you'll see which ones are getting more traction, what time of day is working best for you. So that's gonna start cutting your time, whatever, to do your social media strategy.
Great tools, but one note of caution there. Just be very aware of the fact that news can break anytime,
Yeah.
especially bad news. I remember a case where there was a school shooting 2 years ago, and all these brands on autopilot who had scheduled these tweets were, as people were tuning into Twitter to get information about what was happening with the school shooting, were getting bombarded with these tweets, these auto tweets that had been pre-scheduled. And it really reflected poorly on the brand, that they had let their sort of brand development just go on autopilot and not be self-aware that there was this massive tragedy that was unfolding, and people were turning to Twitter to figure out what was happening. So I think it's good to schedule tweets, but recognize that have a sort of a fail-safe where if there's something bad that's breaking, gotta pull the plug on that. And if you can't send condolences, please stop bombarding people with 15% off or underwear or something. at a
There is
time.
like a ripcord that you can pull on Hootsuite to stop all the activity.
Exactly, and very important to do that if you're going
Yeah.
to use it.
That's a good point.